Good evening, everybody. This is King Crocoduck bringing our first episode of Complete Crock. I'm here with Zarathustra, Serpent, and the Academic Agent for our periodic podcasts. And we're just going to start out by introducing ourselves and what we're all about. So I'll go first. I'm King Crocoduck. I'm a computational biophysicist and also working basically doing some industrial work as well that I can't get into too much detail right now. Let's move on to the next one. Who wants to introduce themselves?
Do you want to go first?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm the academic agent. I have a YouTube channel, and again, I have to keep. I can't really give too much personal information out, but essentially, I do videos about politics, economics, this sort of thing, and I can generally speak to a broad range of issues, including, I guess, cultural ones as well as political or economic ones. So that's where I'm coming from.
All right. I'm Zarathustra Serpent. I'm basically a philosopher and a culture critic. And my channel is based around that and talking about current events from that perspective. I should warn people that I'm a good writer, but not a very good speaker, especially not in English. My first language is Hebrew. And the reason why I'm not a very good speaker is that it's very hard for me to find people to speak to about the things that I'm interested in. So I'm hoping that this podcast, this bi-weekly podcast, will help me improve. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we decided that we're going to start off with some current events, beginning with the Google Memo. This kind of shitstorm that started out for those of you who just came to Earth. First of all, welcome. Secondly, there was this thing going on with Google. There was a guy named James Damore who published this memo in which he suggested that at least part of the reason as to why Google was not a 50-50 male-female split as far as workers were concerned, at least part of the reason may have had to do with biology and with how biology can particularly inform the choices that men and women make as far as career goes and what they prioritize.
Right. Yes.
And there was a bit of a backlash to this, to put it mildly. So I thought,
and he got,
yeah,
and he got,
we'll
and
start
he got fired. Yeah. So.
Yeah, he got fired.
Yeah.
So. Right. So I followed this story pretty closely. Possibly the closest I've ever followed a news story in real time, especially on social media. But how close of an interest did you guys take over the week that this developed? Because this seemed to be an issue close to all of, certainly close to my heart. What about you, Croc?
Yeah, this was pretty important to me. I did follow this very closely. In particular, I paid attention to what people were saying in response to this memo and comparing it to what the memo actually said. And we have some batshit crazy stuff to share today. And you?
I didn't follow it that closely. I didn't like the memo because I thought he was making assertions about women, whereas he should be making speculations. And when you make assertions, this is where you lose me. It's because you can't. I mean, my problem with this SJW equality of outcome thing is that they come with the preconceived notion that men and women are the same, and you have to say no, maybe they're different, maybe they're biologically different, but you can't say you can't really say how men and women are. And that's what he was doing. He didn't come out and say science finds that women may be this way and men may be this way, or we need to think about that. Maybe women prefer this, and he just said women are like this, and this is so I think that if it goes to court, Google is going to win, because this is stereotyping. When you come up with assertions, I think he's. I don't think he should have been fired, but I didn't like the memo.
Can I ask? Did you read the full memo, or did you read the memo that had been edited that was put out by the mainstream media?
I just read a few passages, and I saw that he was making assertions, and I mean I get where it's coming from, yeah. So he doesn't have to convince me that women and men are not the same, and we should not be treating them as if they are the same biologically. But I saw assertions, and this is where I didn't like what I saw.
Any response to that, Crock?
Well, when you say you read these passages, did you read them from the memo, or because I noticed that in some of the articles that I read, they took some of the passages that he wrote and they couched it accusations of, oh, he's saying so and so, but they're leaving out the other things that he says that give it context.
So. Yeah, no, I think I read the memo, and I didn't see. I mean, was there context? I was looking for. Saying we have. I was looking for. Is it saying we have to consider that maybe women are such and such and such? I didn't find that. I was looking for the maybe. Yeah, the maybe.
He was saying that statistics on average find that women are more likely to. The statistics find that on average, women are more likely to be X, and men are more likely to be X.
Okay, that's fine. Did they actually say that all the time? Did they provide the did they provide the statistics? Did they provide the
Yep. So what happened was, I mean, this is just my understanding, but this website, what was it called? Gizmodo? I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah, Gizmodo. Yeah, it was Gizmodo.
They published the memo and they took out the tables and the graphs that he included with it, and that only came out afterwards. The unedited version, which had the data to back up the claims that were being made, and this misunderstanding about data distributions versus saying that every single woman is one way or the other, or making a stereotype, it is one, in the reactions that I saw, was one of the most widely misunderstood and mischaracterized things in how this was talked about. And this is one of the things that I found frustrating. In fact, I found, even talking to people who I know in real life, that it's very difficult to have this conversation, to say, look, as an average.
He was very careful to say that all the time. That I noticed. That he was always pointing out that it's on average, women tend to be like that and men tend to be like that. This is the way I talk about the issue. Yeah, but I say it seems that. But I always add the maybe, yeah, because we can't really make those assertions. We don't know really what the human nature is. So let's move. Yeah.
I have the memo in front of me actually right now. I just pulled it up. I want to read really quickly the TLDR, the sort of bullet points he put in the front to summarize everything that's going to follow. So, first bullet point: Google's political bias has equated the freedom from offense with psychological safety, but shaming into silence is the antithesis of psychological safety. Bullet point 2. The silencing has created an ideological echo chamber where some ideas are too sacred to be honestly discussed. Bullet point 3. The lack of discussion fosters the most extreme and authoritarian elements of this ideology. Bullet point 4. Extreme. All disparities in representation are due to oppression. Bullet point 5. Authoritarian. We should discriminate to correct for this oppression. Bullet point 6, differences in distributions of traits between men and women may in part explain why we don't have a 50% representation of women in tech and leadership. Discrimination to reach equal representation is unfair, divisive, and bad for business. That's the conclusion of the TLDR.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I think it shows that the work that we are doing is disseminating through society, because obviously he's been affected by people who have been affected by somehow all the work that we are doing here is
yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons why this story struck me so much, because he was basically straight out of. He was making many of the same points that we make routinely in our little sphere, and it was very telling that his first two interviews were with Stefan Molyneux and Jordan Peterson. I mean, he could have been interviewed by anybody, and he chose to go to that sphere first and foremost. What worried me more than anything else was the way that this story was processed. Because I think essentially there are three different things for us to talk about here. Okay, one is what he said and do we agree with it, and what do we make of the claims that he made. That's number one. Number two is how is this reported, how is it discussed, how is it dealt with by media and by people on the internet. Okay, and then the third thing is the call on Google, and was firing him the right thing to do, and the legal fallout. So I see those as essentially three different but related topics. I don't know what order we want to tackle them in. Any preferences on what you want to hit first?
Well, we already talked about
the easiest on.
Yep. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was about to start with the easiest, which is whether he should have been fired, or whether Google was justified in firing him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's that easy, because, like I said, I think they can win that case. I don't think they should have. I think, but.
My own position, just to put it out there, is I think they're in the clear when it comes to firing him. Not necessarily because what he said was wrong, but because of the backlash and because of they were kind of forced into this position. There's nothing else they could do after this media clusterfuck.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just for me, I believe in free markets and things like that. So I have no problem with. I'll put this a different way. They're well within their rights to fire him, I think, and I don't know where the legal case will go. But in a sense, I think that is the less important. I think that the cultural impact of this is more important than the details of the firing and the legal ramifications, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and that's the second point you were making, and I think that is indeed very. I mean, it is a kind of a watershed moment, because it's bigger than the things that, again, it's the ideas that we are talking about kind of were thrust into the mainstream in a bigger way than before, and creating a conversation.
So I'm trying to think of which way around we should do this, because I do think it's important to establish whether we agree with what he said, and if we disagree with him, where exactly do we disagree with him? Okay, so Crock, you are I guess the closest thing to being an actual scientist out of the three of us. A lot of people online on our side have said this is the science, these are the facts, what he said is basically the truth. Is, in your understanding, is that true?
From my understanding, what he said was well within the boundaries of what's acceptable, within the boundaries of what's generally accepted by the people in the relevant fields. It's your radical constructivist types who think that everything is a social construct and that nature has absolutely no say in anything.
And just to be absolutely clear on what he said, he was saying that these biological differences between men and women, even though they may be small or just slight tendencies one way or the other, can produce greatly different outcomes. That's basically it in a nutshell. That like this proclivity, if you want, of women to prefer people to things, or for men to prefer things to people, basically means that they're much more likely to choose to be to go into jobs that involve people more than things like software engineering. That's basically what he was saying in a nutshell.
I think that he could have, this is my personal criticism, I think he could have and should have emphasized more the differentials in choice. There's data that shows that people who have both high verbal and high, I don't know what the term is for mathematical IQ, but there's a verbal component, there's a component that deals with quantitative things. For people who...
Computational, say, something like that.
Yeah, okay, computational IQ. For people who are really good at both language and calculations, I know that among women, they tend more toward language, even though they may be good at both.
Mm-hmm.
And that this is to a greater extent than men. Whereas men, I don't remember if they tend more toward math, or if they tend to both equally, or if they tend toward language-oriented, more people-oriented stuff, but to a significantly lesser extent. But whatever the case is, that you do have this there is this skewing in the data that's definitely there, and I think he should have emphasized that more, and maybe focus a little bit less on the more inflammatory things like higher neuroticism. That was something that really pissed a lot of people off. That
was a misstep. Even though they proved him right by not going to work the next day, because but yes, probably a mistake. I would have, if I was an editor, I would have told him to perhaps not say that. But Zarathustra, do you not agree with this idea that because of these biological, I guess, I wouldn't call them predestinations, but they're kind of like tendencies, that more men are going to go into software engineering than women if you just leave things roll? I do not agree with the
way he said it, which again, on my channel I always make that point. You can't come out with assertions about human nature. What you can say is, we don't know. Because we don't know, we can't assume that we should have equality of outcome, because maybe there are biological differences. So maybe we don't have equality of outcome because of that biological differences. But we also can't assume, we can't suppose that that biological differences are the cause. So if we see inequality, if you see inequality of outcome, what I say is show me the discrimination. Okay, maybe there is discrimination. Maybe there is discrimination that causes equality of outcome. Show it to me. As long as you can't show it to me, I'm not going to do anything about it, because it could be because of biological differences.
So this is actually quite a complex thing. I happen to know I happen to know people who may have been involved with this company, who kind of know life on the inside, and they're, how can I put this? There is a perception that software engineers in particular are part of a very male-centric culture, okay, that feels exclusionary. Like if you're a woman going into that office, they're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, they're talking about comics, they're talking about the latest video games.
And since it is a mainly male environment, you'll have to accept it. You have to learn to accept that this is what they'll talk about and this is how it's going to be.
So their argument is, given that it's such a big barrier to overcome in the first place, somebody coming out and saying something like this is going to be terribly off-putting, and that it's going to be like you're making it even worse. Maybe we need to be quiet about those natural proclivities to encourage more women to do it. Crock, what do you think about that kind of angle, which is probably the most intelligent response I've seen from the left, or from people who are against them all?
Well, I guess for me there's a kind of confusion. I'm not entirely sure why it's a moral imperative to try to achieve 50-50 parity.
So it okay. I've had discussions in the past week where I've raised that, and the answer is said, look, we're smart, okay? We know it's never going to be 50-50, but we want to try to encourage more women to do it. Like, we'll never reach it, but like, we want to make it as comfortable as possible if a woman should want to join the team. That's kind of how it's been presented to me. Do you think that concern should just be dismissed and they should just carry on, talking about LARPing or whatever?
I mean,
look,
sorry.
I've worked with women in Maryland, and they come in, they have their own things, and you find things to talk about with them. So I don't. This is such a big problem for women. They find the way. No, it's like I said before. I don't find things to talk to people about. Yeah, I have that problem. Am I being oppressed? Everybody has these problems. If you on some level, you can't. This is not something that you can change. People will talk about what they're interested in, and if it's a male environment, they will talk about Dungeons and Dragons.
One of the more interesting articles I read in the past week was by a woman who was a software engineer. Did you guys come across this? It was a woman who was a software engineer who decided she was going to leave and become a lawyer. She was going to have a career change. And what happened is that she went to work one Monday morning, and she just said to one of her colleagues, hey, what did you get up to on the weekend? In her head, she was thinking about her boyfriend. They had a bit of an argument. They went out for a drink, blah, blah, blah. And her colleague was like, yeah, I spent the weekend in my basement, trying to program my own video game or make a new OS or something. And it was at that moment she realized, these are not my people. I am never, it doesn't matter. I am never going to do that. So I'm going to go to a work environment where I feel more at home. And that got me thinking about video games in general. And there's a game called Dwarf Fortress. Have you guys heard of this? It's been around for quite a while. Dwarf Fortress is a super geeky game. It is ridiculously in depth. It takes, you have to read it's impossible to know what to do in that game. And this guy has been programming it since 2003. Okay. And I just was a little bit interested. I wonder if any girls play this game at all. And I went into and it just so happens that on their forums, they had done a survey, and it was a 95% male user base of that game. And it got me thinking that I'm not sure if I can imagine a woman making that game. And I don't mean that as a sexist comment. I just genuinely can't imagine a world where a woman makes that game. Can you? Spending the time, devoting her efforts to making these, it seems like such a blokey thing to do. I think of other things as well, like football statistics and all of these activities do you know any, I know some women who may be into football, for example. They might like to go and watch a game, or they might, cheer their team on, or they might get into it enough to buy the shirt. But they're not going to be into it to the point where they're memorizing statistics from 1995. I can still tell you, England players' goals, from the early 90s when I used to follow it. And that just seems to be such a difference in the way that men and women are into things. Am I generalizing too much when I say these things?
My approach is that this is indeed how it is, and what what we should be encouraging is women to do their own thing, and make games, the kind of games that you make. Look, take and things do change. Take I think I made this before. Fantasy literature. Yeah, when J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, she went to the publishers, and there is no K in her name. She's not J.K. She's Joan, and they told her, boys won't read a fantasy book if it's written by a woman. So we have to. The Joan is a problem. So she changed it to J.K. She added the K. Now after Harry Potter, suddenly it's the field for women now. So suddenly you have women writing, Twilight and Hunger Games and all that. They changed the field, and they're writing fantasy literature that is aimed at girls. There's always the one girl and the two guys. Yes, it's the triangle. This is what girls like.
Girls are also into Game of Thrones as well. We have to say, like,
Yeah.
a lot of them watch that. So, or read the books.
So it speaks to them on some level. So I always say, just women have come late into the market. It's always been a man's thing, the whole economy, and women have come late into it, and it will take time until they find their own way to do stuff, which will be more oriented towards women, and women will consume it, and then it will open up. But you can't force it. It has to come. It has to come organically. A woman has to figure out how to create a computer game that will be very popular with girls. Let's say, maybe it's a man who figures it out. Yeah, but so this kind of thing can't be enforced, but it will happen eventually.
What really angered me about this entire ordeal, and what angers me about situations like this in general, are the aspersions that are cast against, I guess you could call it STEM culture, against the natural sciences, and in particular the ones that are dominated by men. There are some sciences that are dominated by women. We know biology, for instance, has now been overtaken by women. Veterinary medicine, overwhelmingly women. The only sort of male-centered ones, like even mathematics, I think is now mostly women. I could be wrong, but I think it is the case. It's recently become the case. But physics, engineering, and computer science remain mostly men, even now.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever this is brought up, there's a kind of there's an aspersion being cast against the university departments and the companies that are related to these fields and these disciplines. And I'm thinking to myself, these people have no idea what they're talking about. Like, I go to my university. I've been to multiple universities now, just checking out what's going on and talking to different people in different universities. And I go to the physics departments, and I always see these posters of women in STEM. Go to this club for women's support in STEM and getting girls more interested in STEM. And I go to the lectures. I've even taught female students. And this. I noticed that I do it myself subconsciously. Right? It's not even on purpose. But the professors, I noticed, they treat the girls a little bit differently. When the girl raises her hand, she's sort of picked first. And if the girl says something stupid, she's not really, the professor's like, okay, almost, instead of, no, that's wrong. You know what I mean? There's a kind of, I guess a more, I don't want to say preferential treatment, but it definitely seems that there's a more gentle treatment.
Yes.
And it's and I've done this myself, and without really intending to. I would have female students who would raise their hands and say something completely wrong, and I wouldn't really shut them down the way I would, without even thinking, shut down a male student if he'd said something like that. I don't know if. Yeah, I didn't necessarily do it because I thought that I would be accused of sexism or anything. It's just something I kind of just did.
I mean, we're used to if women can start to cry. Look, it's our that's our experience. That if you talk this way to women, they will start to cry. If you talk to women the way you talk to men, yeah, the more in a more blunt.
Well,
way.
I mean, I often.
Well, in any rate, what really gets me angry though are these accusations that these departments are filled with sexists. Like during office hours, we post up signs on our doors that say "tits" or "get the fuck out."
Yes.
It's like, what are these people thinking? What do they think is going on in our departments? And I'm kind of just lost. I have no idea what they mean when they say there's so much sexism in STEM.
But that's feminism today. That's about everything, not just about STEM.
But you see, I teach in a subject which has got the opposite problem, where we have 90% of the intake is female, if not more than that. Where your typical class composition is got, you could have 20 women to one man, to one man in the classroom, and this is fascinating me for years. And when this came up, because our university failed the whatever the quota test, or I can't remember what it was called now, but basically we don't have demographics that are amenable to. They don't make the SJWs happy. So, and I said, well, okay, are we going to try to do something about the male-female ratio in our subject then? Are we going to do anything to try to recruit more boys? Complete silence in the meeting. Nobody wants to address that issue. And it's fascinated me for years as to why nobody's willing to address that. And also how in my subject, if you look at what happens, there are only 2 or 3 boys in the class, or maybe 5 in the whole year group. But I always take an extra special interest at who's at the top of the class. I don't know if you do this as well, Crock, but it's one of those things. You keep an eye on who's going to be who's going to be good. Who's going to get that top grade at the end of it. And because I take an extra special interest in that, and because I was a top student myself when I was an undergraduate, so it's just something I always like to keep tabs. And invariably, in the top 2 or the top 3, one of them will always be a boy in my discipline. And if you look at what happens at PhD level, and then at actually getting hired level faculty, the numbers are much closer to 50-50, if not more, men. And that's in a discipline with 90% female undergraduates, run by rabid feminists. So how does that, that can't be a mistake. And when I've brought that up with colleagues in the past, they have said to me, basically, they've tried to use that argument that you just used, Crock, in the reverse. That basically, because there's only one boy in the class, he gets kind of special treatment somehow, or I don't know. They try to explain it away using sexism somehow. So if we're really going to have a serious discussion about that, all of that has to come into. It can't just be a discussion about women in STEM. It has to be a discussion also about men in the humanities and what happens to them. Do you agree?
I think so.
I think it's being pushed now by our sphere, and people are beginning to talk about it. And I think even I've read that some schools, I don't remember, it's colleges or in America, are beginning to be worried about the low amount of male enrollees that they have, and they want more boys. I don't know on what level it is, but
can the boys really be blamed though for being afraid of these
are.
campuses, for not wanting to sort of be part of this culture that the university has become?
Is it? I mean, is it really the whole university, or is it just the humanities? Do you feel it really in the STEM?
Inside Inside of the STEM department, no. But I don't spend all of my time inside of the STEM department. You know, I walk past the library and I'm seeing another protest against rape culture. I'm walking past the boards where people are putting up signs, and I'm seeing another, another screed about male privilege, and all this intersectional propaganda. And one grows weary of it. One learns to ignore it after a while. But let's say you're this wasn't me that long ago. You're 17, 18 years old. You're coming into the university for the first time. It's new. You're away from home. It's this completely new culture. You're excited, you're scared, and you're seeing that, there's this kind of culture where people have to say certain things in order to be part of the in-group, and they're not allowed to say, they're not allowed to disagree. You learn very quickly that they're not allowed to disagree, or else they're part of the out-group. And, but out-group is just sort of the stupid, naive, or everything bad you would associate with conservatism. And so they kind of make a kind of embarrassing effort to fit in with this group, preaching the good word of listen and believe, trying to demonstrate what good allies they are. And I can't imagine how exhausting it must be to have to keep that up if you're a boy in the humanities, where you're always sort of doing the charade.
You see, this is an interesting thing. I never have. I've always been completely straight up. Always gone for it. Always, I guess, play devil's advocate, or made sure the other point of view was at least aired. And, because to me, that's the heart of intellectual activity. You have to consider both sides of an argument, encourage people to make up their own minds. And I've always been allowed to do that. I have to say. So I guess it's not, I've always felt it's not quite as bad as it seems. The trouble, I think, comes from how can I put it? Like in the average class, let's say I've got the 20 girls and the 2 boys or whatever. There might be one, there might be 2 of them who are SJW, they're the ones who will then go and make a student union group, okay? And it's really in those groups, in those student groups, that a lot of this stuff happens. Like they take, half of a lecture they listen to, they get the basics, the Judith Butler or whatever else. Obviously, not all of my colleagues are going to encourage them to have this open dialogue. Maybe they don't come, I don't teach everybody. Maybe they don't come to my class. And it's really those vocal minority students, I mean minority in numbers as opposed to being an ethnic minority, who are going to make that sort of thing ferment. They're the ones who get involved in student politics or in trying to run things in like the social space of the students. What they run for class president or whatever it is.
But even so, they're loud enough and pervasive enough, at least, in terms of where they're posting their things and where they're, what kind of talks they're giving, what rallies they're giving, what emails are being sent out by the administration. It's enough, I think, for people to think, oh, everybody must be thinking this. And if I disagree, I can't really air that unless, I'm in a really quiet place with people I completely trust.
Yeah, and you see it happen. I mean, I remember this email went out signed by like the school. I didn't bloody sign it. And it was basically some dude didn't get the job they wanted, and he's kicking up a massive fuss because somebody hired their friend instead of hiring him. I actually looked into it, and it turned out that he basically had missed the deadline for the job. I was like, okay, no shit. But the fact is, they send around that email, like asking for senior members of the management to be fired, and they do it in everybody's name. I'm like, well, I had nothing to do with this. So what do? Do I be a cock and send around an email saying, look, I had nothing to do with this, or do you do the professional thing and just not say anything? And this is one of the ways in which the extremists, the SJWs, manage controlling narratives, because most people, most of the time, are moderate, sensible, and professional. So that, you know, somebody like me would not go out of their way to try to cause, like, to send the counter email saying, hold on, I had nothing to do with this email, and you missed the deadline. So what the fuck did you expect? Do you know what I mean? Like, nobody does. Like,
yeah, you have enough things on your mind to get into this trouble. But
yeah. One thing I wanted to get into on this Google thing, the thing that I found most distressing, really, was the fact that you know, I follow this very closely. For
you were actually quite enthusiastic about it. You said that this is going to be a game changer.
Yeah, so I do, and I do think it was a watershed moment. Maybe more moments will have to come, but I think we'll remember him as the first. One thing that distressed me was the people who spoke out against it. And I will say that on Twitter, I don't know if Twitter is a particularly centrist or right-wing space, but I would say the ratio was about 8 to 2 in support of him versus people who were vocally against him. Okay, but of those people who were against him, really there were only 2 counter arguments. One was basically to make fun of how he looked, was to say he's only doing this because he can't poll. So basically not an argument, just attacking the man's looks and his nose and saying that he can't get laid. Okay, which is, like, you know, juvenile. It's like a 12 to 13-year-old level stuff. The other one was basically to completely misrepresent what he'd said and to say that he was saying that no women could be software engineers, and then to counter that by pointing out this Ada Lovelace was one. And again, it was just like, I mean, it's not an argument. It's not what he one, he didn't say that women couldn't be software engineers, and 2, the fact that there were, like, the fact that there have been some female coders doesn't disprove the fact that on average women have chosen not to go into that profession. So I was very, very confused by how they thought that like, at what level do they think that these are counters to the arguments that he made? And it just made me realize
perhaps they're used to a classroom environment where they are only expected to offer an internally consistent argument in essay form, and usually one that caters to the professor's ideological inclinations. And they think, you know, as long as I just make an argument, that's good enough. The argument, I don't really have to think about it. I just have to marshal some kind of evidence, any kind, and that'll be good enough.
See, what distresses me is that, and I find this more and more as I've argued with people on the left, I'll say. I mean, I know that you have some issues with my use of that term, Zarathustra, but when I say left, I generally mean the sorts of people who are against the arguments that I make. It tends that they think that an ad hominem, they think it's enough to say, if somebody's on their blacklist, if somebody's in their bad books, it's enough to connect them with that person, and that deals with the argument. They never have to actually deal with the underlying argument if they can just dismiss the person. It's arguing on pathos. It's arguing on somebody's character as opposed to the logic or the reasoning of their argument. And it's made me start to think, if we're ever going to win this, do we need to change up our tactics? Do we need to start appealing to, I hate to say it, start appealing to emotion and pathos somehow?
No, because look, I'm sure you know this. Our job is not convince these guys. It's to convince the rest. What I call the passive aggressives. Just to expose the passive aggressives are those who think that the SJWs are on their side, and they don't because they are liberals themselves, but they don't realize that these SJWs are not liberals, that they're actually anti-liberals, and when you argue, you expose it. Look, like you said, this Google thing. I think a lot of people started to ask themselves questions, seeing the disparity between the memo itself and how it was presented. Did you see the video the Young Turks made about it?
No, I didn't. What did they say?
Actually, it was a good video, and they were making sense, and they were saying, look, saying it was Jenkanana, and kind of reminding you of the Jenkanana of old that were more reasonable. Basically saying, look, they start by saying the media is misrepresenting it. The memo is making some interesting argument. Cenk said what I said, basically that you can't make assertions like that. But he said also that he would call him in, this guy, but he would probably have to fire him as the boss, and he was for reasonable reasons, just like we were saying. So basically, they made a reasonable video about it, and you can see that I remember that a few years ago they were talking about the pay gap, as if they're getting paid, women are getting paid 78% for the same job. Now they don't talk like that. We are getting to them. And also these they were looking at these at the claims that he was making and said, look, some science, there is science to back up some of these things. They called other things into question, but a good video. And so this is the kind of there is an awakening, a slow awakening, and this is how you defeat, not by going to emotions.
I think I agree. There's one article by Chandra Prescott-Weinstein. Have you read it? It's called "Stop Equating Science with Truth."
Yeah, I did come across that in my travels in the past week.
That one infuriated me unlike any other. And I think what infuriated me the most is that the author should know better. She's a physicist by trade. I'm just going to read the first sentence. It's 2017, great start, and people are still debating whether or not women are intellectually inferior to men, and whether we are entitled to a workplace that isn't toxic to people simply based on their gender and sex. Just from that first sentence alone, you can tell she either didn't read the memo, or she's deliberately being dishonest. And it doesn't get any better from there. She's a crazy Homo Lysenkoist type. She actually looked into her background. She did her graduate studies at UC Santa Cruz. There are a couple of people there. Donna Haraway, she used to be a biologist, and I recently learned about another one. Karen Barat, I think her name is, also used to be a physicist. Both have presumably moved up in the world. Now they teach in the feminist studies department. So I'm thinking maybe at that point is when they must have gotten to her. And then for her postgraduate studies, she went to MIT, where possibly Evelyn Fox Keller got her hands on her. So yeah, it's
look, as a philosopher, I have to say, science is not the truth, but it is the best of our knowledge. So that's what we rely on. Yeah.
I agree. That's not what she was writing, but I agree with you.
Oh, okay. But broadly speaking, then we all kind of agree with Demore. Maybe Zarathustra a little bit less so, or you think that he could have phrased it in a way that
I know, like I said, it's not just about phrasing. It's about look, again, presenting it like it's the truth, presenting the science like it's the truth, and not like it's maybe or the best of our knowledge of or thing like that. I saw it as he was talking like he is the authority on knowing what women are like, and that's not how you should present it.
Okay. But I mean, do you think that more, because I think this is a related question that Crock mentioned near the start. Do you think it should even be a goal to get more women to be software engineers? Because this is another thing that has really interested me. Because since I've started looking into gender distributions in various different jobs, I've noticed that there are lots of jobs, and I think Damore mentioned this in the memo, where the numbers are like in the 90s. Garbage collection is one. I think Thunderfoot picked that one up. That 97% of garbage collectors are men. I think it's 93% of.
You're telling me that the 3% are women, garbage collectors, really?
I know. Apparently, so there must be.
Why that's not high?
There are, I think it's 93% of all job-related deaths are male. Okay, and I mean it's been a well-known thing that they've done hundreds, if not thousands, of psychological tests on risk aversion. Okay, this is a massive topic, and consistently, women are more risk averse than men, especially when it's a big gamble. Okay. And to me, that basically just explains why there are fewer women in those sorts of jobs. Now, what
they claim, though, that it's due to socialization.
They claim that it's due to socialization?
Yeah, I think that when you pin them down on these statistics, when you pin them down on all the science, they say at the end of the day, they defer back to this black box of socialization, that every difference is ultimately due to the fact that men and women are socialized differently. It's maybe the toys that we were forced to play with, maybe.
Okay, but you don't change that like that. The socialization is something that is dependent on so many things, from so many institutions, so many customs, so many things. So if you change that, you change that gradually, and so you let it happen. Like I said, you let it happen. You let the market do its thing. And what I say, if a woman, if you see women trying to go in a place that they didn't go before, help them, but don't force them to do it. Don't tell women that they should go into STEM. If they want to go into STEM and they have problems with something, which maybe then maybe you can help them, but don't push them into STEM against their will. That's stupid.
Just as a point of interest, I remember reading some years ago, I think it was Freakonomics Radio, this came from. There was a paper where they had actually tried to tackle exactly this question. There are apparently a couple of matriarchal tribes where they did these risk tests, and in fact they went to Africa and found some of the most patriarchal tribes. So the absolute extremes, like proper patriarchal tribe, a matriarchal tribe, and then they have all the data from where these risk tests have been done elsewhere. And it was interesting that in the matriarchal tribe, the men actually, there was the only case where the men were more risk averse than the women. But as an average, the entire society was less risk averse than all of the other societies. In all of the other societies, men were massively more prone to take risks than women. So there is some evidence that culture plays a role. But the fact that the whole society was less risk averse suggests that there's something about women that is risk averse. Does that make sense? Like, I'll put it a different way. The most risky women in the matriarchal tribe were nowhere near the most risky men in all the other places.
What it says is that it's biology and socialization. So you can change it to some degree, but it suggests that still there is a biological basis which will make women less risk averse.
So where I was going with this though is, why do feminist groups only focus on certain jobs that interest them? And this is something that came out of something
Because
else
it's
I was
not
listening to.
it's not about helping women. It's about changing society. Come on, it's Marxism. It's
But
it's uh,
why do they
it's
care
about
about?
painting society as a patriarchy, so you can so you can call for revolution. That's
Why
what
do
it's
they
about.
care? Why do they care about software engineering and not about the bin men? Why do they care only about certain jobs and not about those many other jobs where, like, I never see, I don't know, calls for
There's no prestige in those jobs.
right. So there's no
The point-
so that they only care about the prestigious jobs. Why is that?
The point of their entire enterprise, even though they'll never admit it, is the consolidation of power for those who come out and make these accusations. We see, we the anointed, we see that there's this problem in society. We see that you have these differences in distribution. And we went back, we looked in history, and we uncovered the truths about how society, actually should be. We're woke. So, give us the reins, and we're going to be give us the power to reform society, and let us make it in our image.
What they suggested on the podcast I listened to called it's done by the National Review. It's called Mad Dogs and Englishmen. They weren't talking about this. They were talking about affirmative action in American universities, which is basically where. I mean, I was shocked when I heard this. Apparently, if you're Asian in some universities, you have to get double the GPA rate that a black student does. Is that right? Just to get in?
I don't know about GPA. I do know that between Asians and white people, an Asian needs to get an average of 140 points more on the SATs, the sort of qualifying entry exams, than white people do in order to have an equal shot.
Right, and apparently between Asians and blacks it's double. Okay, and I mean I just can't believe that happens. Okay. But what they were saying is that the reason that they put their focus on things like university is because to the sorts of people they are, which is, let's face it, elites, intellectuals, middle class people, they're the things that are important to them. So it would not occur to them that lowering entry barriers in universities is not going to help poor black people whose actual real life concerns are millions of miles away from university entry tariffs, right? Like as in the solution is nothing to do with the actual problem, but it's because they're intellectuals, and it's because intellectuals are so self-centered that they only see their own immediate concerns. That's why they're interested in the software engineers and the university tariffs, but they're much less interested in all of those other jobs. Is because their entire worldview is completely myopic. They live in a bubble where only their own concerns are the important ones. Do you buy that?
I don't know. I mean, that's something that's it's a bit sweeping.
Okay, all right. Shall we move on to this second big topic then?
I think so.
All right. So, for those of you again who just came down to Earth, again, welcome.
Yeah.
And you probably want to go back to where you came from because things aren't very good here right now. In Charlottesville, there were some white nationalist protests taking place. And on, I believe, Saturday, a young man, 20 years old, rammed his car into a group of counter-protesters. It sounds like it seems like he has white nationalist affiliations. Not a very pleasant young man. And he killed a woman, 32-year-old lady, in the process. Now he's facing second-degree murder charges, among others.
Yeah, I see that the right are claiming that he was attacked. His car was attacked.
Yeah,
But,
his probably going to be his defense. They were throwing things at my car. I got scared. I sped up, and then when I rammed it, I got scared again, so I drove away. It's probably going to be something along the lines of this, but
yeah. the thing I want to talk about, it made me thinking. We should not be, we're all making this connection between the alt-right and the regressive left because they are about identity politics. When somebody gets killed, this is not a good time to make this comparison. To blame the left. It's not a good time to blame the left. And the thing that I was thinking about, it has to do with what I do as someone who explores the history of culture. The alt-right started out, basically, it was part of the, well, not when it started, but when this whole anti-SJW thing began on YouTube, on the internet, the alt-right was very connected to it, kind of part of it, although there were always differences, but we were kind of sharing the same memes and all that. And I always knew that this is going to be bad. But this is what happens always. You look at. I see this whole Kekistan thing. The whole thing that we have going as basically as a counterculture. And you look at countercultures of the past. You look at the hippies and the punks. When they started out, it also started out as left-wing people from the left and the right coming together to just rebel against what was going on, and creating something anarchic and fun, and it always had some, and because it was so anarchic, there were always elements from everywhere, even from the extreme left and the extreme right, and it never ends well. So the hippies, the counterculture that sprung around the hippies, had the Hells Angels, and it ended up with the Rolling Stones going to saying that they want to have a concert, which will not be dependent in any way on the authorities. So they didn't want police. So the infamous concert in Altamont where they hired the Hells Angels to do the security, and the Hells Angels did the security like they do security, and basically killed the 60s. And with the punks, the National Front was started to show up to punk concerts, and and in the end, the punk movement kind of split. The extreme right went with the skinheads, and punk turned. And this is what's going to happen to us. Yeah, it's already happening. We are turning against. We are pushing the alt-right away. Yeah, and we are turning against them. Which we at first we didn't really pay attention to them, and now we are paying more and more attention. So I think this is the is happening now. It's becoming less less anarchic. You have to start to take responsibility. So it's becoming less fun because it's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye. And Charlottesville was where somebody lost an eye, and so you are going to see now a lot more, because I saw the video you made, the Academic Agent. You basically said they are not. I am not them, and this is what I said. That I already a few weeks ago said we have to start talking against the alt-right more. And the alt-right are noticing it, by the way, that more in the skeptospheres have started to turn again, to talk about the alt-right, and there is this war brewing. So the thing is to be less fun.
We should mention that Sargon did before he went off Twitter.
Yeah. I didn't see it, but I understand that he was fighting against the alt-right for like a couple of days, and then for some reason got kicked off Twitter.
Yeah. Crock, any thoughts?
Well, I've been chatting with Crowd and T as well on this topic, and he's planning on making a set of videos against the alt-right.
Yeah.
You guys know Crowd and T, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah, so he's going to be.
that's very
It's very
good. That's a very interesting person to do it, because I would say that Croton T is one of the hardest core anti-SJW, like, as in, how can I put it? If any one of us was going to be accused of being tribalistic about his anti-SJWism or his hatred for the SJWs, Kraut is right up there, isn't he? Wouldn't you say he's probably like one of the most hardcore of the anti-SJWs?
I'd say Crock is very intense when he just burns people when he doesn't like them. So I think that his style is the thing that is very hardcore.
Yeah, he's gone after people on the hard right, white nationalists, Holocaust deniers. He's been very like Zarathustra said, he burns.
What concerns me about this is that anybody outside of our sphere, okay, doesn't understand the difference between those guys who are marching, Kekistan, Sargon of Akkad, Kraut, me, you, or like, they don't understand the difference between us. Does that make any, like, we understand.
Yeah, but that's how it is. That's how it is, and that's always how it is.
Culture outside of that doesn't understand.
When you have a counterculture, the rest of the people don't understand it, don't know what's going on. They just see it as one big blob, and they see it's all the same to them. It's always like that, and they learn eventually. And right now, you are seing you're seeing the split really occurring. Where we are turning against the alt-right, and it's going to be a war now between us and the alt-right.
What's very concerning for me, though, because earlier on in the week I was feeling much more upbeat about what we talked about with the Google Memo and Demore. I thought this was a watershed moment. When I saw what was happening in Charlottesville, and when I saw that Jordan Peterson was being called alt-right, okay, and then these guys are being called alt-right, the way that normal people process these things is, rather than start listening to what we're saying, instead they feel concerned that we are getting pulled into, quote unquote, the alt-right, that, you know, we are, the danger is that a James Damore or a Jordan Peterson or a me or any of you guys are getting pulled further in. How does that get cut through with people outside of our sphere? That's my question.
This I talked to you about this in the past. This is a generational gap, and young people do understand the difference. The normies are those who are on the
Clintons.
Yeah, those who are on the internet, that understand the internet culture, know the difference. Those who are outside of internet culture are those who don't know, and you just you win in the end. You know, that's what happened with the. I mean, there's a reason why I'm doing my series on psychedelia. It's not just to talk about something that I know. I'm showing the similarities between what's going on now and what went on in the 60s. And
there's a curious symmetry at play too. I want to mention. SJWs call us and the alt-right Nazis. The alt-right call us and SJWs. We call SJWs and alt-right collectivists.
Yeah.
There's a kind of three-way war about to brew, which is going to be very interesting. But I think the most important thing will be to get it out there that this is a three-way war, not a two-way war. That there is a third faction.
Since I've been talking about it for a while, and since it's the media that is keeping the narrative that we are alt-right. You have this basically left-wing media, which isn't necessarily SJW, but that's how they understand it. They are what I call the passive aggressives. They see they are for the left, and they don't really, even if they don't share those values, they support the left, and everyone else is the alt-right. And so this is why the information gets like that out there like that. And we are creating alternative media and alternative forms of information, and we are slowly getting to people. That's how you do it.
Do you think I'm being too pessimistic to think that because I mean, honestly, were you not scared by those images of people with fucking torches? I mean, the visual, the optics of it were awful.
It was like 1,000 people. Let's have
right, but
people, not a lot.
But a group of white men all chanting with torches in the deep south. I mean, it instantly makes you think of.
So there's 1,000. Look, it's not only racist. It's also people who want to preserve the. The whole thing was about because they were removing the statue of Robert E. Lee, which means something in the South beyond racism. And also, but let's say they're all racist. So there are 1,000 racists in the South. Right. I don't see this as a big deal. By the way, same thing I say about Muslims when they do the marches, and people tell me, look, they're calling for Sharia law. I tell them, it's like a few hundred people. So don't be that alarmed and say that it's all Muslims. And the same things, and the same thing goes here. The alt-right is it's smaller than us. The alt-right is smaller than the Skeptosphere, and so are the SJWs. The SJWs have support in the media. The alt-right, I don't see them having support anywhere. So
I guess what I'm saying is, was this a significant setback for us? After I thought we'd made progress this week with the James Damore thing, has this basically killed this getting cut through in the media? Because it was starting to happen. The mainstream newspapers, even the New York Times, put something out vocally kind of supporting Damore and denouncing Google. I'm not sure if the two events happen the other way around, whether that would have happened, because now just even being slightly associated with those people seems to pollute the message. I'm just not sure if our culture and if our media is able to deal with that level of nuance. How can there be three sides? I mean, it's mind-blowing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it feels like the narrative is too difficult to get purchase among anybody who's not already up on this, and it needs to. This is what I'm saying. It needs to cut through to normal people who don't spend all their days watching YouTube videos.
It cuts through slowly, and again, the young people are getting it, and slowly it diffuses in society. This is, I mean, the reason why I'm less pessimistic is I see how again, it reminds me of things that happened in the past, and those who are on the liberals wins. The liberals win in the end. Those who believe in democracy and the basic ideals of enlightenment and democracy, and the extreme left and the extreme right lose. This thing has happened before.
But why? Why are we going to win?
Better ideas. Better ideas, and this is because most humans are not not hateful on that level, and not collectivist on that level. And they want freedom, they want individualism, they want all that, and it's not fun. The SJWs are so unfun that they drive anyone away. The alt-right has been kind of fun until now. It's the fun has stopped. I don't think it's going to be fun anymore to be alt-right, but it is fun to be on our side.
I guess what worries me is that those images were so terrifying to. I mean, they weren't. I looked at them with a sense of horror just because I thought, holy shit! I mean, they look like something out of bloody. Did you watch that film, the Quentin Tarantino Django Unchained? Like,
Yes.
It was almost like they were the Southerners from that. I was like, fucking hell, what are you guys doing? Like, do you not know how bad this is going to play with anybody who's not mental? So, and what, Croc, do you not understand what I'm saying here? Where it like, how can we turn around now and say, well, look, we are against the people they're against, and have that make sense to sensible people? Because, like, I've got friends of mine who are saying, like, look, when you oppose the SJWs, you are buddying up with those guys. How can you have a three-way?
You just have to show what it is that they have in common, the SJWs and the white nationalists, and this common aspect about them that makes you hate both.
Like, can you ever see it getting to a point where media drops their support for the SJWs? That's my biggest concern, because if their political will is, look, we're gonna back these guys no matter what. Like, perhaps if we I really worry about that.
Perhaps if we show that the two feed off of each other, that the two exist as a consequence of one another, perhaps that could be helpful.
We are showing it. We are showing it, but we are showing it, but we are showing it to the people who are watching us. So
consider this. I mean, consider the force of the following argument. If you posit that there exists a group, a common political goal to a particular group, that everybody who belongs to group X has a political goal Y and must therefore act in a manner Z, does it not follow that people outside of that group are going to form their own group and with their own political goal that they're going to pursue? So if you say, for instance, that there has to be a certain common political goal that is unique to Black people, and to which all Black people must conform, and that whatever political goal this is, it's antithetical to the interests of white people, isn't it inevitably going to follow that some of these white people are going to get the same idea? And how can a person reject the force of this argument?
Well, this is why I'm pessimistic. Okay, the following reasons. One is that people aren't reasonable. If you read Thinking Fast and Slow or The Righteous Mind, the takeaway is that people don't think with reason. They think with their feelings. They think with their emotions and intuitions first. Reasoning follows. Reasoning is post hoc. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we are dealing with a period for the first time in history, okay, that we don't have religion as the dominant force in various different cultures, okay? And when I look at the behaviors of the SJWs and of these white nationalists, I'm seeing a clamoring for something like religion. We can all see the cult-like aspect of these behaviors. And because I do believe in human nature and biology driving certain things, I worry about that propensity in human beings. The third thing that means that I'm less optimistic about this resolving itself, as it has done in the recent past, is that if you take the longer view, the recent past, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, was the exception. They weren't the rule. Cultures are fragile. I've been reading this book called The Strange Death of Europe by Douglas Murray. I mean, he writes for The Spectator, so he's generally on the right of things.
Yeah, I know.
But he talks about how people in the West, people of our generation and younger, tend to think that culture is permanent, that, you know, just because we have our Facebook and our Twitter, it's always going to be there. It's not going to go anywhere. We're safe. But if you look at history, if you look at the big kind of seismic changes that have happened in not just in our own cultures, but in other cultures, culture is fragile. The people who understand this, he argues, are people in Eastern Europe, people like in places like Poland, but in places like the Ukraine, people who experience like both the Nazis and the communists. They understand that the way of life that has persisted for centuries, you know, not just decades, centuries, can be lost overnight in a heartbeat. So they're much more, I guess, vigilant about trying to protect their institutions and their, you know, their sacred values. We in the West have been a lot more complacent about that, and this is how these things that all of us on this call hold dear are being slowly eroded. And I don't know, I mean, for me, the shift in discourse between 2015 and now is shocking. If you'd have told me 2 years ago that you know, in a couple of years Donald Trump would be the president and people would be fucking killing each other in armed protests, with one group wearing masks and another group carrying torches like the KKK, it'd have been like, "What? Get out of it!" You know, we're in the 21st century.
I was predicting it back in 2015, because this is how this is where it goes, and there's going to be a period of violence now, and which will delegitimize the extreme left, because it's going to escalate now, and Antifa is going to kill people as well.
I agree.
And it's going to delegitimize, and I mean, I don't know if it will delegitimize the SJWs. I don't know if they will do terrorism. If you know, Black Lives Matter or whatever. But yeah, and again, it is. See, I don't think our culture is fragile. I think democracy is quite robust today in the West. The problems in the past have been. I don't see the seismic shift in ideas that can bring down what's happening now is a lot of silliness. It doesn't have any. It doesn't have anything behind it. It's those are not strong ideas. They're easily refutable. Just it's stupid people, and well, I don't want to say it, because some of them are smart, but there's it doesn't have anything. It doesn't have any leg to stand on. Both the alt-right and the SJWs, they believe in. They don't have anything to stand on.
What would you say is the strongest idea of our time?
One idea. I mean, we're living in a society that is very pluralistic. A lot of there is no there's many different cultures and ways of thinking that are intertwined, and that means that power is dispersed all over society, and that means that you can. It's harder to revolutionize it. It's actually, it makes it more robust to a revolutionary change, but also you have the power to make a change. If you change something, because power is dispersed, if you change something in one place, it has a ripple effect that changes society, and I think that eventually the good ideas defeat the bad ideas. in our society. Because look, I look 10 years backwards. The internet culture here. Scientology, we were fighting against creationism and against homophobia, and all three were beaten. Were basically pushed to the margins. And now the fight is against identity politics and Islamism. And identity politics, as it's now it's about the left and the right. And I think we're going to defeat them as well.
See, I'm reminded, and I guess this is where we may. I guess this is where I may be a bit more conservative. I think conservatives have a habit of, I guess, seeing the worst or having that tragic vision, as we talk about, where we don't think people are good, and we don't necessarily think the best will always win. I'm reminded of the W.B. Yeats poem, The Second Coming. You know, he says, "Turning and turning in the widening Gaia, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best all lack conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." Now, he wrote that in 1919, and at a time where people thought, Christ, we've had the biggest war of all time. Surely we're not stupid enough to do all this again. And they did do it all again. People were making these exact same arguments all across the 1930s. In fact, Jews in Germany itself were saying, look, these ideas are just stupid. Surely nobody will go along with this. Like right up in 1932, they were still making those arguments. They were making those arguments as Hitler was elected chancellor. So I guess what I'm saying is, if people have been if educated people have been that stupid in the past or haven't seen it coming in the past, why should we think that people are any less stupid now? I mean, I look at the level of discourse around the Google Memo and around this, and I wonder.
Yes, it does seem like we're living in Weimar Germany right now, doesn't it? Communists and fascists killing each other in the streets. It's going to escalate from here, but is it really going to phase out?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, you've got two sets of people who don't listen to reason. They don't listen to reason. They don't try to reason through their arguments. They've got to the point where they're using physical violence. And how do these things go? How do moderate people who I guess want to keep things intellectual as opposed to how do we combat that? Will it actually end up with all of us with guns in our hands one day? I mean, how do we stop these twats?
Of fascism and communism in the 1930s were a lot closer to the mainstream than they are today. People could switch from Nazism to communism to social democracy because the differences between them were not that far apart. And Nazism and communism were much bigger, much more popular in the 1930s in Weimar than they are today in the West. So it's still.
I mean, but like with respect though, I look at the climate and fucking Jeremy Corbyn, fringe figure, just a year ago, considered a complete crackpot, got 43% of the votes in this country. Marine Le Pen got 35% of the vote in France. Fucking Donald Trump is the president. So I do look at that landscape compared to where it was, let's say, I don't know, in those lovely days when it was bloody Ed Miliband and Gordon Brown and these sorts of people, or when it was when it was, I don't know, the worst thing we had to worry about was George Bush's response time to a hurricane. Like with respect, it just feels like this is a very different time. Do you not understand what I'm? Do you not think that?
But I see it as a tremor, which happens every few decades. So again, we don't know. Yes, it's society is always under changes. So we don't know where it's going, but I don't see the I don't see these ideas having power, having sway on
Crock, any thoughts? I mean, see, the thing is, a tremor could be like, I don't know, get biker gangs in the 60s, or they could be literally World War II. So yeah. What's a tremor?
Do you think the people that voted for Corbyn voted for him because they want a socialist country, or because they think he is going to be a social democrat like in Scandinavia or something?
Well, I mean, I'm sure most people voted for him just because he wasn't a Tory, but I mean, that's almost that almost doesn't matter. Like the people who voted for Hitler, most of them weren't rabid Nazis, right? It was just like most people, most of the time, are just along for the ride. I guess my bigger concern is that people don't think most of the time, and if we concede, if the narrative is conceded on all sides to extremists, it's very difficult for moderates to win from that position. Generally, that's what's happened in most of the revolutions that ever happened, is that the more moderate parts of the coalition were crushed and destroyed. I don't know. Crock, am I being too pessimistic to think?
I would point out that even when we talk about the 30s, the moderates won in the end. They won World War II, not the extreme right or the extreme left.
They didn't win with ideas, though. They won with lead and steel.
But still, I mean, I do think that people fought for the idea of democracy, for the idea of freedom. So it's still it was still a battle of ideas, and if it wasn't a good idea, maybe not all people would have fought so zealously for it. So. And again, it's so the question is, how much violence are we going to have until we defeat this? That's the question.
Yeah,
and I think not as bad as the 70s.
I wonder, what do you think the public reaction would be to, I don't know, a moderate terrorist? I know that sounds like a contradiction of terms, but let's say we woke up one day and on the news we saw, I don't know, the body of a white nationalist hanging next to the body of I don't know, some violent Antifa member, and some cardboard was plastered across their chests saying both the same or something along those lines. How do you think the public would react to such an image?
Yeah, you see, that this is my concern is that the media and our culture is so polarized, it can't even process it. This is what the James Damore.
It would be completely incomprehensible to people.
I feel like the James Damore thing proved that it's too, like, we live in a time where that idea can't even seem to penetrate. It's like there are only two sides in this. So I think he'd be written off as a one-off nutter rather than a member of a political party. I don't know. What do you think?
Again, who are the people you're talking about? I think that people, not the people in the media, but just people who are reading this, who let's say, who came, because it was a bigger thing, became aware of this for the first time of this whole discussion. They might start thinking now, and they might look for go for the internet and look for more information, and they might watch one of your videos. So
I mean, ultimately, this is what I would like to happen and has to happen, but I wonder if it can happen. I wonder, I mean, it feels like the moment can't process the center ground, even though the center ground has basically had, I guess, the run of things for the past 10, 15 years. Now it feels like we've separated to this point where it's almost impossible to have that. I mean, I've even seen our buddy Fox from the West. He tries his hardest to talk about polarization and talking about fanatics and partisans on both sides. And I watch him on Twitter, and he just gets hammered. He gets hammered from both sides, and he's called a coward for not picking a side and all the rest of it. And he's someone who's 19, 20. If you're in that sort of environment, how do you deal with it? How do you make that a side? And I feel like I genuinely feel like it won't be possible for us to truly have a voice in the discourse until one of these two other sides is defeated. Maybe it has to be the alt-right who's defeated. It's probably more realistic for the alt-right to be defeated before the SJWs. But
if the SJWs win, though, they pigeonhole everybody who opposes them into alt-right. If the alt-right in some nightmare scenario wins, they pigeonhole everyone who disagrees with them into communist SJW, territory.
Or Jew, or
Cuck, whatever.
Or non-white.
I mean, it's difficult. See that the strategic choice that our buddy Sargon and others made, whether they thought about it or not, was basically we were going to hit on the SJWs and kind of have a tacit alliance with alt-right. They didn't really talk about those issues, or you'd see them crop up in the comments and so on and so forth. Now I think that can't sustain itself after this. I think we're all agreed on that. But now you have a three-way. Now you have this triangle. I find it really hard to envisage how people in the public sphere I guess the public intellectuals, people like Steven Pinker, Jonathan Haidt, I've seen, Taleb has come out on this sort of side, Damore, Peterson, all of these people have some sort of media presence. But I wonder if it gets through, or do they just end up getting lumped in on one of the two sides?
But it can also work to give us more legitimacy if people see that we are fighting against the alt-right. You see what I mean? So suddenly we are. So suddenly they learn to differentiate and say, and to see that we are not alt-right, and if we are effective in this fight, because look, Millennial Woes, I watched one of his videos, one of his latest videos, and he's a pretty smart guy, and he's alt-right, and he was talking about Carton Tea, and he said that the skeptics are coming for us, and he was like, the SJWs are gone, and the skeptics are now coming for us.
Is he afraid of the skeptics, or?
Yeah, no, not so much afraid, but I think he gives us more respect than the SJWs, that we are more dangerous, and I think we are more effective to fight against the alt-right than the SJWs are. And if we are the effective ones in this discussions, then suddenly the media will pay attention more to what we are saying.
So one of this guy I know in real life, okay, who's basically a pretty moderate guy, generally of the centre left. He piped up from nowhere and started kind of having a go at me earlier on today. He said, "I'll just read you his chain of tweets here, and you two guys can tell me what the best strategy is of coming back to this sort of attack on us." He said, "Of your many stupid hot takes, this one is about the stupidest. How many people have Antifa killed recently compared to white supremacists? Ignoring entirely the fact that one side believes that fascism is bad and the other side believes that non-whites should be exterminated. I don't like Antifa, but pretending that both sides were equally wrong doesn't stack up when one side are actual fucking Nazis." This kind of nonsensical hyperbole, and the hyperbole was me saying Antifa are as bad as the Nazis, is exactly what leads to people getting tired of debating shit with you. You've got no sense of perspective at all. You want people on the left to take you seriously at all. Your reaction to Nazis killing someone was to whine about Antifa for fuck's sake. Again, one side thinks fascism is bad and the other side wants to exterminate non-whites. These two things are not equally as bad. Do you really think that chanting "we have nothing to lose but our chains" is comparable to "Jews will not replace us"? So, and then he goes on and on and on. What's your guys' reaction to that tirade that he came out of the blue with?
I'd say that he has a very selective attention span, like very many other people. He doesn't take into consideration the violence caused by Antifa. You know, we have nothing to lose but our chains, and we are against fascists, and this somehow summarizes Antifa. You know, the one of them is against fascism, one of them are fucking Nazis. Well, is this really an accurate description of Antifa? Are they not for the abolition of private property? Are they not for the abolition ultimately of governments? You know, he's really downplaying one side in order to score points against the other.
See,
yeah, I would say don't make the comparison. I said it in the beginning. Don't make a comparison between Antifa and the alt-right. Show that they both come from the same place. But I don't think we should make comparisons between them. You know, show that they're both coming from identity politics and thus strengthening each other. But
yeah, that's good.
The comparisons are not. There's no. It's not useful to make comparisons of that sort.
No, I like what you're saying. One emphasize how one feeds off of the other.
Yeah. It's not, especially like I said at the beginning, when the alt-right actually kills someone, it's not the time to blame the left, and this is you heard it in what he said, that they actually kill someone and you blame Antifa, and yeah, and he has a point there, because this is not the time. This is victim blaming. This is the time to attack the right. But you know, you can have the discussion about how identity politics is bad because it informs both movements.
It just feels sometimes though, like I always remember that ContraPoints video where he was the he was playing all the parts himself, but he had one guy in a Nazi costume there. The kind of presenter who was meant to be kind of, I guess, a James Rubin character, and then like this perfectly reasonable person in a tweed jacket trying to come up with counter arguments, and watching the Nazi basically win over Dave Rubin. I like, my reaction to that whole tirade by him was to feel like that's like, rather than him sitting in a Nazi costume, he was sitting in a communist kind of Antifa costume. It's kind of like a difficult. I don't know, and I'm starting to wonder if rationalism, reason, and all of these logical arguments that we make are ever going to make cut through. Like, knowing what we know about human beings, this is why I keep on.
Look, yeah. Free market is speaking. Who's more popular on YouTube? We are. I mean, the alt-right doesn't have much traction on YouTube.
I don't mean, I don't know who are the alt-right YouTubers. I've never cared to look, to be honest, because I don't want to watch Nazis, you know. So, but who are they?
Millennial Wars is someone who is quite interesting, and maybe we should have him on sometime to talk to him because he is intelligent, and he makes good videos, and he has like 30,000 subscribers. I think Richard Spencer has like 15,000 subscribers. They're not big. They're not big, and neither are the SJWs. If they are big, I mean, you can talk. No, you know that the SJWs don't have much. I mean, Anita Sarkeesian has like 200,000.
Yeah.
Lacey Green was the biggest SJWs, and then she not anymore.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and they don't, and the videos are hated. Yeah. So,
Croc, any closing thoughts?
None for me. What about you two?
Well, I think we should do this again. Like I said, twice bi-weekly. I think it was a good talk, and I hope we will. I mean, my vision for this was to expand a little bit further into culture, but we'll get there.
All right, Agent, what about you?
Great, yeah. Well, hopefully I can be, I guess, more optimistic next time. that we talk. I don't know, we'll always be doom and gloom.
Why? Because this what makes the disagreement makes the discussion.
I guess. Yeah. Well, thanks for the people who stayed the whole course. Thanks for watching.
This has been Complete Crock. Have a good day, everyone.